Hello and welcome to Say That Again Slowly, the Cambridge Festival podcast where students at Cambridge University chat with the experts who have contributed to the festival. We tried to pair up students with researchers and authors from different disciplines to bring things back to the basics. There are no stupid questions here. My name is Kika Hendry, I'm an English student at Trinity Hall, and today I'll be exploring the Deception Island Hut installation with Elizabeth Lewis-Williams, who is the writer-in-residence at the British Antarctic Survey and has created the installation along with Sam Ruddock and Story Machine.
Hello everyone, I'm here with Elizabeth Lewis-Williams and we're in Downing site in Cambridge and we're standing by Deception Hut Island and we're just going to have a little walk through and listen, kind of talk about some of the sounds and the feeling inside the hut. And Elizabeth is the writer-in-residence at the moment at the British Antarctic Survey, and I was wondering whether you could tell us kind of how that happened or kind of what work you do there and how that kind of began.
Sure. I've been in and out of Bass doing my own research in the archives for the last few years. So I started when I was scanning in my dad's black and white photographs. He was in the Antarctic between 1959 and 1965. And I was trying to write some poetry in response to an unpublished book he'd written. And I realised that because I've never been to the Antarctic, I had no idea what it sounded like, what it felt like to be there. I had his stories, but in the poems I was writing, I was tending to just parrot his words. So my mission in the archives was really to find out a bit more about what it was like to live there, and using the sort of reports, the charts, the data, the photographs and the stories left by in the archives by people who worked there at the same time. So as I'd had that kind of long association intermittently with Bass, I asked if it would be possible to do a day a week, and I would offer a writing workshop, and have had the real privilege of being able to talk to some fascinating people and again spend some time in the archives. It's a really fantastically collegiate, positive environment to work.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that both kind of working in the archives, scientifically kind of the research there, but also very kind of emotional, very personal, connection with your dad working there. I was wondering what exactly was he doing there, or how, did it feel to be kind of like working with his documents? So.
It was one of those extraordinary things about sort of the material archive. For example, there was a food report and it was in Dad's handwriting, or part of it was in Dad's handwriting, and there's something about handwriting that brings somebody who's long gone immediately present. So it's quite a moving experience from that point of view, and also then extrapolating from that, thinking about all the other people who've left documents and unpublished memoirs as well as their photographs. There's a huge, it's a treasure trove of memory and memories, collective as well as individual. I think I'm right in saying it's, I can't remember the exact title, but it's been recognised as part of the British contribution to UNESCO World Memory. And you can see why. Any sort of question you might have about what it means to be human and live on the planet is in some way addressed by thinking about Antarctic living.
Because fundamentally the hut here is a home, it's like a shelter. It's so, kind of taking us back to something completely shared, and I think that's really fascinating about it. Yeah.
And it is, the lovely thing there are lots of lovely things about the hut, but one of the lovely things about the hut is it was built on a place called Portal Point on the Antarctic Peninsula, and it was a refuge. And to have a refuge hut at Portal Point seemed very profoundly metaphorical. The hut is a portal to Deception Island, which is elsewhere. It's a portal to an imaginary journey, but it's also very physical evidence, even as a replica of what it means to establish shelter, how to live together in a harsh environment, how to make this small home. I love the story in the memoir that I read, that they played lots of Scrabble, they played games of cards, and even though they didn't have a Scrabble dictionary to check their words, they managed to agree on that. And I know that it wasn't always the case that everybody always got on, and the darkness of the long winter, the polar night, up to 119, 120 days of darkness, had a huge psychological impact on the men that were working there, and made it very difficult. There's a report written in 1959 by the base doctor at Halley, and he was talking about the way that this kind of tight-knit family became much more irascible, harder to motivate. There was appetite loss just because it was dark. They were often trapped in the hut for days at a time because of the weather outside. And so this refuge hut, it wasn't a permanent base, it was for field trips, but it does seem to represent that kind of fundamental shelter and shared living and mutual support.
Is that why you've chosen this specific hut? Is it quite like because of that kind of transience and, I don't know, solitude, like a refuge there?
There were a number of reasons for choosing the hut. I mean, part of it was because of the name. Fundamentally, it was because I saw a photograph in the archives that was just astonishingly beautiful of this hut in a state of partial disrepair. The cladding that you see there had been partly torn off on a apparently polished rock, and heaps of ice and the sea and the mountains in the distance. And it's just extraordinary. I mean, it's pinned down with these rope metal tie-downs in cement blocks, and it's just there. I mean, years after having been abandoned, it was in a very remote location. And then it's Portal Point. I mean, the very name suggests that we needed it. But we couldn't have used a Deception Island hut for the Deception Island installation because they're too big. And this is the perfect size, really. It's a slightly barking mad operation, inviting an audience of 5, maximum 7 to see something. It takes 2 days to build and 2 days to take, or a day to take down. So it's not the most portable of huts, but it's still a great experience. And I think it makes it, taking people through the door, makes it really immersive. Because you go from this 21st century Downing site, you go through the door and you're immediately in a different world. It's dark in there, your eyes take a while to adjust to the darkness, and then you're back in the 1950s in the Antarctic, and then because people are listening to the sounds and the music and the words through headphones while they watch the film, which is projected on the window, it feels as if this world is entering your head. It becomes a really sort of properly sensory experience.
Yeah, it was snowing here the other day, and I know one of my friends was just working here, and he just wanted somewhere warm, so he went in, didn't know what it was, and kind of was a reenactment of needing some shelter from the snow. We certainly learned something about nailing in roof tacks in the snow, because it was cold and the roofing felt gets really brittle in the cold, and it kept cracking, and we were then thinking, if you take the temperature down by several degrees, and you've got a blizzard or just snow, and you're trying to nail in these tacks with gloves on, how do you do that? How do you hold the tacks? If you take your gloves off, are your fingers going to stick to the tacks? You get really cold, you can't feel your fingers. So it was I had quite a lot of respect for the people who built it before, but I have an awful lot more now. And I know you work at UEA as well, and John McGregor there has kind of written his book Glean for Stand, and about men in Antarctica, and they're in a hut, Station K. I was wondering whether you kind of felt a connection to that from having built your own hut, or how kind of, if there had been like a exchange of ideas about Antarctica or anything like that.
Yeah, we had we were really lucky. He came in and did some readings in the hut when it was up in Norwich, and And he chose an excerpt from early on in the novel where people are being separated. There's a blizzard, a whiteout, and the radio connection is intermittent. And he used the headphones from the installation to give to the audience. And then he'd set up a radio set on the table so that we could hear and see and be immersed in again this experience of trying to listen. And a lot of the book is about language, and when language breaks down. One of the tropes about Antarctica is that it's so immense and so extraordinary that it, for whatever reason, beggars language. Cherry Apsley Garrard was talking about the worst journey in the world. He said it beggared our language, and that was this sort of sheer hardship of it, but the beauty of it has a similar impact. And so we were just talking about the Antarctic and language, and also about care, because the book ultimately is a very unsentimental and beautiful study of how people care and take care for one another.
Basalt speaks.
Dribble sodium and chlorine as you will. I give you olivine and feldspar. Take magnetite and hematite for sulfate and magnesium.
The ocean replies.
Oceanus, Moana, Valta Mary. I will weigh the ocean am.
Hard this rock against your breaking waves.
And fly.
Pockmarked by the rain's whip, the dark sea curls back its lips.
So I've just come out of the film and I'm here with Elizabeth again, and yeah, I found that footage really moving. I thought I'd be more tuned to the sounds and kind of the birds and the words. They were so touching, but that footage, it was really moving as well. And we kind of talked a bit about the men, the scientific research, but also there was obviously that whaling history as well before that, and the whales are almost as big and as spectacular as the glaciers. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about kind of how you came across that, or how you kind of worked with that material in your poem and your...
Yeah, it started with looking at the images of Deception Island and seeing those very haunting, evocative pictures of the digester shed and all those ruined, the sort of the rusting tanks. So I was looking a bit more into whaling history, reading some of the memoirs. And it just struck me that on the one hand there's this industrial scale exploitation and massacre, and it's genuinely is a huge bloodbath, showing the worst of humankind in its sort of exploitative tendencies. You know, it's the sort of before carbon fuel, it was the whale oil. But at the same time, the men who were working in those appalling conditions came from poor backgrounds, were just working to send money home, and they weren't murderous killers. So I think it really struck me when the other thing was the black and white pictures that I've been looking at up until that point, and then looking at the whaling photographs, it's just they're drenched in red, which makes them even more shocking. But I think all the time with particularly with Deception, you've got these contrasts between the brutality of the whaling, the care and attentiveness of the scientists. You've got these sort of individual tragedies, awe-inspiring environment, and this sense of geological time, and that the human is precarious and frail, inhabitant of that environment, which I think becomes most evident against the sort of volcanic backdrop. And ultimately, I just looked at the sequence of animals who were just trying to survive, and human beings were one of those.
Yeah, I think it wasn't a sense of the British explorer, man, hero. It was kind of a small man just trying to survive as well, just not like being caught up in the whole system as well, not kind of glorifying it in any way. That was really interesting.
Yes, it sort of plays against that hero narrative that you get a lot with the Antarctic, intrepid explorer, surviving against the odds. I think it feels to me a lot of the real heroism is about these very small acts of survival and mutual care.
And there was a moment where they're kind of playing, I think there was a couple of women as well playing in the snow, and it's just like, oh, it's also a place of laughter and like there is this violence, but also like with everything there is both. That's part of survival.
Yes, that was a strange piece of footage, because women weren't allowed in the Antarctic, certainly not to work, but they did travel as wives on some of the ships, not the scientific research ships, but I really don't know. I mean, keep meaning to find out, but I think they may well have come across with the governor of the Falklands for a state visit to.
Because they very much have the kind of woolen buttoned-up coats. Like it was surreal.
Smart, inappropriate shoes. There was actually, I think, the Chileans, as a part of trying to establish a claim, actually brought 3 or 4 families to live in the Antarctic, possibly in the 40s or 50s. I can't remember the dates. For 3 or 4 years, families did actually live on one of the Chilean bases and go to school. And I think there was an Argentinian baby who was born in the Antarctic. Again, it's all part of this trying to establish a claim. But nobody actually owns the Antarctic. It's governed by international agreement.
Also, I mean, the words in that, the sounds, they were so like material and tactile as well. You were talking about like handwriting, and it felt like, I don't know, the way that the words were being pronounced and being spliced with the images, like it really like evoked that quite strongly. Even the idea of trying to name these places which we don't own, we don't govern, we've called it Pendulum and Deception Island and Portal. It just feels quite like emotive but also futile to just name these places that are just completely, I don't know, ice and snow and violence and all these different things.
There's sort of two things there. The naming is, I think the naming is brilliant. It's become much more a case now that places are named after particular people who've contributed something to Antarctic science, but there's some great names. Inexpressible Island, just because when the people going past it are just feeling hopeless. I dread to think why Circumcision Point was called Circumcision Point, but probably shape. But the materiality of the language was something important. The sound of the words, actually the way the poem is structured on the page is part of that. But when Sam and I were listening to the voice actors who are auditioning to play the part, one of the things we were really conscious of was the texture of their voice, and then thinking about the contrasting textures and the character of whether it was the basalt or the whale, what kind of tone we wanted.
Did I notice that your name was Witch in that? That's lovely.
Yeah, it was just trying to acknowledge the presence of the poet as somebody who'd effectively curated these archival voices. So I wanted that to be part of the whole story, but not in a sort of footnotey way, so that it was recognising the inaccuracy, if you like, or the personal quality of the curation, as well as the magic that can be evoked by language.
I think that's a lovely place to end our discussion on the magic of language. Thank you so much for speaking to me, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm
No worries.
really glad you enjoyed it.
Make sure to follow the Cambridge Festival on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook and YouTube, and go to the Say That Again Slowly podcast on SoundCloud for more fascinating interviews with experts on time travel, aliens, counter-speech and groundbreaking medicine, just to name a few. Thank you for listening.